He's a professor of real estate management at Toronto Metropolitan University. Well, one big factor for housing affordability and supply in Canada is, and has been for some time, immigration. Canada has lofty targets when it comes to new Canadians, but targets aside, we have a record number of would-be immigrants stuck in a bureaucratic backlog. Some 2.6 million applicants caught in limbo, waiting to be processed. Kareem El-Assal is managing director of CIC News. Great to have you with us, Kareem.
Great to be here, Amanda. Thank you for having me.
So those who are skeptical, I'm tying this to housing because people who are skeptical about whether the housing market will stay strong will say simple supply and demand tells you household formation will support strong housing prices. And we know there are millions of people who are waiting to be processed as new Canadians. Give me the context on this of how serious it is that we're at that level, more than 2.5 million people, and we're not able to get through that backlog.
Yeah, it is a serious issue that's having huge ramifications economically and socially. On the economic side, we're obviously dealing with significant worker shortages, and that's largely a function of our inability to bring in workers from overseas quickly enough. On the social side, families are being kept apart, and of course refugees and displaced persons are not being able to come into Canada in a timely manner so that they can restart their lives.
Do we have a sense of what the problem is, of why there is this kind of, we know that it's happening with passports and elsewhere in the system, but why with immigration, where there's been such a focus by this government in particular on upping our targets and bringing as many people as possible?
The backlog is largely a function of two issues. First, there are legitimate reasons associated with the pandemic itself. Namely, at the start of the pandemic, Canadian government officials understandably had to shelter in place for their health and safety. At the same time, there have been policy missteps taken by the government which have exacerbated the situation. So unfortunately, due to a mix of the two factors, we have seen the backlog grow, like you said, Amanda, to well over 2 million people, and it has nearly tripled since the start of the pandemic.
Now, on the plus side, Kareem, we're still attractive to people from around the world who want to come here. We just recently, of course, topping out on lists for livability and stability. That's the good news. Does this backlog put people off? Are we at risk of losing potential new Canadians because they know there's a waiting period?
Well, I mean, Canada lives in a global village. Our immigration system isn't isolated. Obviously, when people look to move to Canada, they're also comparing us against countries like the United States and the UK and Australia, New Zealand, and others. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the surveys conducted during the pandemic indicate that demands to come to Canada remains very strong. And the key reason for this is that in the surveys, the prospective newcomers indicate they view Canada's economic prospects post-pandemic to be far brighter than what they expect in their source countries. So in spite of all the challenges, it seems like demands to come to Canada remains very strong. And even putting analysis aside, I mean, we can just look at the numbers. The fact that we have an inventory, a backlog of over 2 million people, tells us, as a matter of fact, that there remains very strong demands to come here.
Kareem, great to have you with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amanda. Take care.
Kareem El-Assal is managing editor at CIC News. Coming up, how extreme weather events might make our lives more expensive. But first, this. If you were hoping to swipe right in the metaverse, you'll have to wait a while. And if that whole sentence is nonsense to you, you're not alone. The dating app Tinder had launched in the virtual platform created by what used to be called Facebook, but it turns out there isn't as much dating happening as Tinder thought. The real story is what that means for the hugely hyped metaverse, since this category of product usually leads the way in new technology, not just the oldest but the most lucrative of professions. We're back after this.